So this is the week we have. This is the only week where we have 4 of these OTAs. We'll have one more tomorrow, and then of course next week you guys will be here. We'll have mini camp Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Any questions?
Sean, are you expecting Courtland Sutton to mini camp next week?
Yeah, I think he'll be here for mini camp. I mean, it's mandatory, and when I've been asked about Courtland, I'm going to say this. Man, I just know his work ethic. I know the player, and there's a list of things that race through your mind this time in the offseason as a head coach. And respectfully, when I say this to him, because he and I have talked, I think that'll work itself out. So I think he'll be here, yeah. But I don't know that for sure.
Sean, is it a contract situation that was reported a few months ago?
Well, it's not that he doesn't like our new uniforms.
Well, Sean, when guys have skipped mandatory minicamp, where do you come down on finding them? Has it always been a hard line, or?
No, look, it is what it is, and this was more of an issue before the 11 CBA, and I'm going to date myself. Training camps, it was very normal to have a player or two that wasn't signed yet. And then even in the off-season programs. And then after 11, it wasn't as much of an issue. I think guys staying away from OTAs is, that can happen. And one of our players occasionally will miss a day, and let's go. I mean, we're training. But relative to the CBA, it's been a minute, but yeah, I mean, and don't come away from this with he's threatening to fine. It's just the mandatory part of the off season is the mini camp, and then training camp's mandatory, and there we go.
Could you speak to the evolving vision for PJ Locke over the last year and how important it was to bring him?
Last season, I think he began to create that vision for himself, to his credit, and closer to the ball as a pressure player, also in coverage. It's great to see him out there healthy, and I think he earned, some of those snaps and the confidence level for him. He's one of those players, when I talk about you see confidence through demonstrated, he saw it, felt it, we saw it, and then it's pretty powerful. And he's smart, he's tough. The first time I remember talking to him a long time about his role was when we were on a plane to go to Justin's father's funeral and his grandmother's funeral, and PJ was on that plane, and we had a long conversation about about that. So those are snaps he's earned, and he's put himself in a good position.
Sean, I know you're just getting to know Bo Nix, but in the short amount of time you've gotten to know him on and off the field, is there anything about him that reminds you of a young Drew Brees?
Their personalities are different. I'd say, all right, we're looking for similarities. So I would say mentally, he wants to know as much as fast as he can. There's he's the son of a coach. Now, Drew wasn't necessarily the son of a coach, but this group of quarterbacks in general are kind of like gym rats. They enjoy the process. It's been a good room. I mean, it's when you talk to Davis or Joe or myself, it's these guys are doing well. They're pushing each other. Today, we were on this odd day where every day you came, Bo was running with the ones. Today, I think it was Zach's turn. You'll see mini camp, but I think there's maybe a maturity level because again, he's played 61 games, and when we got Drew, it was off of his rookie contract, coming off an injury. So. Yeah, I mean, he locates the ball well. He's accurate, and I think Drew was.
You mentioned the extra day. Who gets the extra work for the first?
I haven't even thought about it.
Okay.
I haven't even. I mean, meaning, they're all getting the reps, the works, the walkthrough reps. This is to better prepare us for the competition in training camp. So honestly, I haven't thought about it.
You talked about putting a lot in and installing a lot over this. How has Zach handled that? 'Cause it's obviously it's new.
Yeah, look, he's doing well with it. Look, when we got Jared, he came from, there's about 3 strains of language in our league. I'd say, you have the West Coast strain, you've got the old digit system, and then you have kind of what the Patriots had run, Rod Earhart and Bill Belichick and Parcells. And so Jared had come from that strain, and I'd say that there's a pretty significant, iPhone to Android adjustment there. Whereas in Zach's case, there's a little bit more similarities relative to how things are called. Not all, but these guys pick that up pretty quickly.
With the competitions, not just a quarterback, but across the roster, how important is this off-season program in OTAs mentoring and compared to training camp and preseason?
Look, it's the beginning and start of building a foundation for what you want to accomplish next fall. And so, the enthusiasm, the work in the weight room, the investment, all of it is important.
When you acquired Zach Wilson, did you do so, that they talk about quarterback rehab, knowing that he might need some quarterback rehab?
We just felt like, man, we'd love to work with this guy. It wasn't too long ago, we remember grading him, and we felt the investment was worth it relative to his skill set and his talent. And so it took a while. We spent the better part of a month and a half working on that trade.
Sean, Malcolm is already a guy we're kind of hearing out here when he's played.
Roach?
Yeah. What's sort of your experience with him and what he brings, both as in kind of that vocal leadership area, but also against.
I think he loves playing. He really does. He's effective as a player, and it's kind of contagious. He's a really good teammate and someone that can play multiple positions, but there's certain guys that are glue guys in a locker room, and he's one of those guys that look, he had to steal first base. He was an undrafted free, he wasn't born on third base. He had to make it, and then he's a guy that appreciates every day, and his teammates quickly. I talked to a few of the other guys that have been here, and very quickly he's acclimated himself, and I'd say he endears himself to his teammates, and I think that's a good trait.
With Mike McGlinchey, how was his first season compared to your expectations signing him, and what do you expect from him year 2 in this scheme?
Yeah, so a lot to that question. There were a number of things that he brought in a positive way. There's certain strengths he has, just like all these players. There's things we want to work on in the offseason. It's very important to him. He comes from a winning program. And I think that, going into year 2, you're going to see his continued development. There's a toughness to him in how he plays. But I'm glad we have him.
Is that similar with Powers as well, that free agent glares off him now in year 2, settle in a little?
Yeah, and look, where you land sometimes as a free agent, in both of their cases, they're coming in to a new place, but a new offense that's trying to find some identity. Sometimes you can land on a Super Bowl contender your first year. A lot of it is just where you end up. But certainly both of those guys have filled in and provided not only leadership, but quality play for us. And I think in year 2, you're going to continue to see that curve, not just for the 2 of them, but for the group in general, go up.
Jaleel stole first base, to use your phrase, last year, made the team, found a role for himself.
Yeah.
What does he have to do, given his size, obviously, to sort of make a bigger role?
I think his continued growth, you see him protecting the football. He's very disciplined as a change of pace route runner. I know he wants to continue to work on his role in the passing game. He'll come up and, wear me out asking for cut-ups and looking at certain routes. So it's 1 to 2, but again, he's here at 5:15, even in the off season. First one here running in the weight room, and by the time he's at breakfast and most people are arriving, he's put in a good hour and a half's worth of work. So it's just the way he's wired, and it's impressive.
You've spoken well of Lucas Kroll. What are the things that you really like about him?
Well, the same things, we see in Dulcich relative to, we see a certain stature we like, so that means we have a bigger target. He's got good vertical speed. He's young, and so we think there's room to grow, and that was one of the reasons we signed him. So these camps benefit certain players, like I said the other day, a little bit more than others because you can get into your patterns and see some things. So he's doing well.
Sean, what are your thoughts on the conversation about a potential change to the off-season schedule and starting camp?
Yeah, look, it's a topic every year that gets brought up. Is that 3, 4, 5 years from now? I don't know. I try to anymore focus on the things that are like, when you get older, you hear those things and you're just like, all right, I don't need to worry about that right now. I mean, ultimately, you're going to have a period of time where the players are working prior to the season, and you're going to have a time where they're gone, and I think I have a grasp as to what the proposal might look like. Yeah, it just is what it is. I'll worry about that when we get there.
With J.L. Skinner, how is the vision evolving for him?
Still safety. Still, this is going to be one of those. We talked about this training camp. We're going to see a lot when the pads come on, and we're in these team run pass periods. Do we feel like he's better versus the run? Do we feel like he's better versus the pass? I do think he has good instincts. I'd say the second half of last season, even when he's running scout team, we noticed on offense quite a bit. Man, this guy all of a sudden was jumping routes, and he was someone that was, that stood out on the tape. So I think he'll want to build off of that.
We haven't seen a ton of Pat out here so far. I mean, it's here obviously, but is that just you've got young guys you want to see? Or are you being?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're being smart with the rotation. I don't know how many snaps he had today. He's healthy. Yeah, I mean, I think he's doing well. And then once he saw that Foley's at 44 and he's at 8, he knows he's got some work to do. So that's pretty impressive. 44.
Mike Burton, first of all, it seems like he looks like he's a little bigger this year. Like, did he size up?
I don't know. He had a baby boy, and so I don't know if he got caught just sitting around for a while. But it's not like him. I think he's. I've known him for a long time. Like, if he heard you ask me that question, and let's just pretend he's at his current weight, like, he'd lose sleep for like 3 nights now that someone asked, does Burton look heavier? And he'd be out here. So I'm going to quietly, when I go in, ask the strength coach what his weight's at. He's very conscientious. There's a reason he's played this long. He understands who he is. And generally speaking, the players that play past 8 to 10 years in this league, they have talent, but they also know who they are. And so you take a guy like Aaron Glenn, and I'm dating myself. Aaron Glenn got drafted very early by the Jets as a corner. He was an elite corner, and then eventually he probably was the 2 corner, and then he played another 8 years as the nickel corner. There was never a time in his career where he didn't know where he was at that stage in his career. The challenge for some players that maybe don't have as good a grasp as to where they are, it's harder for them to play as long because they don't agree with the same role or vision. Bert knows exactly where he's at, and I think he's one of those guys that when you're game planning, there's certain things you may or may want to do with a certain player. So if we're doing it with Mike, we know exactly what we're getting and we feel like he can do it. And so it's pretty, it's a really good strength to have as a player for the coaches when you know exactly what you're getting. And then you know exactly what you're not getting. And so it's easy to define his role in the kicking game or on offense. But he's super passionate. And I would guess, I'll find out, but I would guess he's like exactly the weight he's been, and he wore a tighter shirt today or something.
For the record, I meant it as a compliment. Like, that's a guy I want to look.
No, and it would be, that's a good point. It would be pretty common for players at this time of the year to be a little thicker relative to the weight room because they haven't hit the 6-month strain of a season where it's a little bit harder to keep some of that weight on. So I mean, I know he's been working, and he's one of those glue guys, a little bit like Malcolm that we talked about, that there's a lot of other things that are brought to the team, and so they play longer.
When you had Barron last year, he was coming off knee surgery, joint.
He's so much further. Yeah, I mean, look.
Like, he looks different.
Well, he and I have 5 conversations a day, and I don't know if we had 5 the first half of last season because you're trying to get to know everyone, but he's much further along. There's a confidence about him. He reminds me a little of an Ohio State player we had, Will Smith. And I'm not saying that necessarily. They play the same position. His personality reminds me a lot of Will, the late Will Smith. And so they both played there. But he's in good shape. He's been working hard, and I've gotten to know him, and I enjoy coaching him.
Have you given him a hard time about he's now a personal stock where people can invest in him?
I didn't know that.
No.
So you can invest in him.
Sort of, yeah, like a stock.
There's a website with the investment players.
Yeah, and so he's in that, huh? Interesting.
Based on future earnings. So
yeah, I'm familiar with it. I know what you mean. So he's betting on himself. I like it. What else?
You were excited when you got John Myers.
Yeah.
When you talk about the physicality he's going to bring to the team, have you been able to see sort of the traits?
Yeah, and look, we're talking about John Franklin Myers. Each year, consistently, you saw the numbers. They were. I mean, it was almost like you couldn't even imagine how close they were. Now, it came through power rush, bull rush, took an edge. It's harder for him now to show you those things when we're not in pads. And so now it's alignment, it's the scheme, where am I at, how am I fitting? I think we'll see a lot more of that when we're in pads. He's again, you can't bull rush a guy out here. It's kind of hard to do, but he's a powerful player. And I would say when you grade or look at his pressure statistics over the last 4 years or 5 years, it's pretty interesting. They're very consistent, like across the board, and so you see a very consistent player. But again, during these drills, you're not able to necessarily see that.
Coach, you talk about glue guys. How many are there on a typical team?
Hopefully more than less. I think when we talk about a player, at some point we talk about what kind of teammate he is. Does he endear himself to others? And I think it's an important trait that you get to a point where pretty soon, when we're upstairs talking about a player, we ask ourselves, are the guys downstairs going to like the fact that we brought this player in? In other words, there's a responsibility that we have to then bring those type of players they're expecting, and that's when you're building, that culture you're talking about that everyone's looking for.
Sean, I'm curious. Like, you mentioned how it's harder to judge offensive linemen, defensive linemen during this stage of practice. But when you're looking at the full evaluation of those players, how much are OTAs? And what's the percentage of it including full evaluation?
Yeah, I mean, it's a small piece. It gives you an idea mentally where people are at. because you do begin to see assignment alignment. You can begin to see MEs or mistakes relative to, we move the tight end, the front's got a top or it doesn't top. We change the protection, do they set the correct way? So you're gathering all of this relative to what's getting ready to come, but I've just seen this so many times where you get to training camp and you get through those early days and your pads are on and you're practicing and you have a preseason game, and then there's a player we're discussing that that you weren't able to necessarily see it during this time frame. And remember, and I say that we're evaluating everything, but this is putting themselves in the best position for the critical weeks of training camp where it's much more magnified and much more important. I mean, all of it's important. Anything we're doing, we want it to be important. It's just harder to do some things.
You didn't see much of Jonas in pads last year before he got hurt.
Yeah.
He's missed a lot of time. So
yeah, both when you look at it, he and Tim, they were kind of like redshirt players again. And so I'm anxious to see him once, we get into camp and get to know the player more when he's carrying his shoulder pads, fit and runs, playing the passing game. He'd be one of them.
I'm sorry, I answered. He asked me a question. But Mike Westhoff, how excited is he about this new kickoff thing, and kind of does he already seem to have some ideas cooked up for how to handle the situation?
Yeah, I think he used to use the analogy. There was a time we had 18 or 19 plays that mattered in the kicking game, and then gradually that moved down to about 11 or 12. I think we're going to be back. So look, if you coach a certain phase of the game, you want to coach plays that can affect the game. You don't want to coach less. And so it's certainly, look, he had X amount of time away. This week he reported he sits in the front kitchen seat there waiting to talk. And when I walked in, he had 15 ideas on this new kickoff. But I think it is going to be pretty important. And I think it's going to be significant, especially in the first 5 weeks of this season, because you'll eventually see things move in a direction of success. Or, our league, there's no secrets. Anything that takes place on a game tape takes place not only in our league, but it goes around the country now. It goes to colleges because you can purchase the All-22. So I do think it's going to be pretty significant. And so for someone who's wanting to, be a part and have impact, it's I don't have to hear him say there's only 11 plays anymore in the kicking game. Now it's like you got plenty of plays now.
Well, I guess there's an idea maybe the Chiefs talked about safety Justin Reed kicking the ball off.
Oh, there's all sorts. I haven't talked about it. I mean, I'm just saying there's all sorts of ideas that you keep hearing. And so, there's a box you got to kick it into. It's a rectangle, and you want the ball to land there. And you understand all of it. You understand why you gain an 11th guy if it wasn't a kicker. And then I think the body types relative to who's returning will be interesting. And certainly the body types along the front lines I think will be a little bigger because there's less running involved. But the plays are going to be fast. Like we had a period yesterday, and I was sitting right at the front lines, and everyone's waiting for the ball to be caught, almost like you were tagging up on a deep fly ball. It's caught, you can go, but they're very quick in developing. So I think it's going to be exciting and certainly new.
With the body types like you mentioned, how much does that impact roster construction?
It does. It all gets back to can we get him to the game? How do we see him playing in the game? And you'll see, I think, offensive linemen in that protecting front line, because that's a group that's hard to get, aside from field goal, it's hard to get reps. But I think I think we're starting with a bigger group, a bigger picture, and then working our way down rather than trying to guess and narrow, who we think those candidates are.
When the XFL did it a few years ago, how much film did you watch?
We've got it all cut up, and there's some elements that are different, but it's something we've looked at and will continue to look at.
What was the most interesting thing you saw in watching the?
Well, it's the. It's not a long developing play. It's much more like an offensive play where, it's a quicker handoff that gets you're into the hole, and it's happening much faster.
Sean, you were in Dallas with Larry Allen at the end of his career.
So I was there 3 years, and then my first year in New Orleans, 2006, we lost the NFC Championship game, and back then that was played after the Super Bowl. So I was the head coach of the NFC Pro Bowl. So I had Larry even in the Pro Bowl. And there's a funny story. Look, he was a tremendous player and a tremendous person. He was very quiet, but he was smart. And so the first meeting you have at the Pro Bowl is in a ballroom, and you got your whole team there, and there's probably 10 laundry bins of footballs that are going to be signed, and they put them in the front row, and they just start going, this is going to take an hour. And they're going to sponsors, whoever, and everyone's signing the balls, and I don't know what Pro Bowl it was for Larry, but it was 10, 11, 12. But our third string quarterback at that Pro Bowl was Tony Romo. It's his first, and he's not a rookie, but he's young. And of course, I coached Tony in Dallas, and I had heard that, at the Pro Bowl, and this was over in Hawaii, it was, if you could get someone's room number, that was like gold, because, all the teams stayed at the same hotel with the families, and, your incidentals can spike pretty quickly for a week there. So we're signing these balls, and I said, Tony, my son Connor, and Connor knew Tony, of course, when I said, my son Connor has made a picture for you, and he wants to bring it up to your room. What number are you in? He said 1118. And Larry Allen was signing balls, and then quietly he just looked at me. And then a day later, Tony had to check into another room. So I would say, aside from being a great player and a great person, he was smart. And this league will miss him. I think it's been said a number of times, the Hall of Fame is the greatest. Like that's the top of the mountain. And then Bill and I would have these discussions, and I would say, let's pull a starting lineup from the Hall of Fame. And I would say he would be unanimously the starting left guard. And there aren't many players that you can say that about, because the one thing about Larry, as broad as he was, if he turned this way, he was that deep. And so that ability to kind of just punch a linebacker in a running play and watch this linebacker be lifted off he was a tremendous player. And one last story, because I think they really just honor him. Bill had a conditioning test at the start of training camp, and we'd run 6 300s, and we'd start at the goal line. Group 1 would be the receivers and the running backs, DBs. We'd go to the 50 and back, and they'd take a break, go to the 50 and back, take a break. No, there were shuttles, 50 back, 50 back, 50 back. We would do 3 of those 300-yard shuttles. And then the second group would come, and that'd be the linebackers, the tight ends. That would be the quarterbacks, call it the mid. And they would have their times, a little bit slower, and 50 and back, 50 and back, 50 and back. All right. And 300-yard shuttle. You'd wait a minute, then you'd know another one. And then finally, the last group would be the O&D line, and they'd run their shuttles. And, about the third or second shuttle, Larry now was just crossing the line when the group was starting. And so at that point, you knew Larry's not going to make his times, and then maybe he didn't finish. And so, Bill was old school. That meant Larry was going to be PUP on the bike for a few days, and then we're running offensive versus defense, and we're in pads, and none of us coaches are going to tell Bill it's time to get Larry back because we're not running the ball well, and that he's never going to have to run 300 yards ever. But there'd be about day 4, Bill would say, "Where are we at with Larry?" And Maurice Carthon sat right to his left, and Mo would say, "Hey, he knew that if we gave him Bill, let's get him back in the fray. We'll get going here with our offense." There was going to be a bark back, all right. And so we were going to take that bark back, and then he was going to be back the next day, and then all of a sudden these running plays looked outstanding. So that kind of came like the sun comes up in the east every day. Each training camp, Larry's going to be on PUP. What day is he going to come back? And then all of a sudden, life's good with the offensive run game. He was magnificent. And now I can't speak as a former player of his with him, but I can speak as an assistant on that side of the ball. He'd just have a grin, a smile, a work ethic. He loved playing. He's very genuine, and he was tremendous as a player. But I always remember that grin that he had once in a while. And when he got Romo's room number, that was significant. So let's leave on that good memory.